Hummus Hero. Hummus Hero, how have you been? He commented a lot on my channel. I don't know if he's still subscribed or what, or if he's still on and I just haven't caught wind of him, but it's nice to see you on here. It's been a while.
I
But
think
anyway,
Hummus Hero is a staple over here, voice of college football. It's good to see you.
yeah, 4-8 in last 12 games.
Yeah, pretty bad.
Yeah. And
you
then,
have to think that Lincoln Riley is close, if not already solidly on the hot seat. I mean, 7-5 was it last season with the Heisman quarterback. You have another. I still think Miller Moss can be a great college quarterback. I came in this season thinking he was going to be near elite, especially that with that performance against Louisville in the bowl game. I was really high on him. I thought he would fit the role a little bit better than Caleb Williams because he was more of just a pocket guy who kind of wanted to operate the system the way Lincoln calls it. And I still see it, running the offense running well, but it's only when everything is humming just right is a Lincoln Riley team doing great. They're the least resilient teams, going back all the way to his Oklahoma days, least resilient teams in all of college football. Time after time, those Oklahoma teams would make the playoff or they'd be in a big game and they would just shatter. And that's what I saw. That's what I saw in the Michigan game down the stretch. That's what I saw, against Penn State here. There's just no resiliency. And I also have to wonder too, the move to D'Anton Lynn as defensive coordinator, I thought was a great hire.
It is.
But I'm also kind of prognosticating this too, because I think a lot on like game theory, like metagame stuff. I'm a giant nerd outside of this. I actually play a shit ton of Magic the Gathering and stuff outside of this. So I'm always thinking about these things. But with Wink Martindale's defense struggling, and with D'Anton Lynn taking his scheme to USC and now having some issues, and other defensive coordinators and analysts around the country kind of adopting different iterations of that amoeba defense, I kind of wonder if some of the offensive schemes are kind of catching up to that style of defense too, as well, because Aller was able to pretty effectively, again, outside of those interceptions, pick apart this defense in this game. And that defense is supposed to be built to slow down a passing attack. So kind of want your thoughts on that real quick too, as well.
I didn't think of that. And part of me disagrees, but what I will say is Kotelnicki's so good that, I mean, you kind of hit me with a curveball there, which I like, because I didn't.
That's what I do best.
I didn't think of that. That's something I'll have to think on. What I will say is, like, with the trick play where they scored a touchdown at a halftime, that was USC. That was USC not having the right player. They could have made a play, and just because it was Warren against a safety who probably isn't like, I don't know, like he's not Ed Reed. Well, you're cooked. And then there were some, I don't know. I've always thought this year, and I could be wrong, that it was purely personnel, that Grinch ruined the defense so badly, and USC, well, they had to use the portal. And when you bank on using the portal, you're not going to hit it off unless you're using them to supplement your existing talent, like Oregon, for example, or Ohio State. Ohio State and Oregon's current issues, because no, they're not perfect teams, they're probably not greatest of all time caliber teams, are issues they already had entering this year. It's not because their portal players are busting. For USC here, their foundation was already very shaky, and Lincoln Riley made a hard reset by hiring the defensive staff that he did, and they lost a ton on offense. They've improved a lot on defense, like the fact that they were able to limit Penn State's ground attack, force some turnovers, the fact that they're much better. But I think that they don't have a Lincoln Riley offense either. Like their defense has improved, and then the offense has offset that by equally regressing. I mean,
that is a really good point, because sorry to interrupt you, but
you're good.
Their SP Plus rankings defensively, they're 62nd right now, which is far improved from Alex Grinch days where they were down in the hundreds. But to your point, I actually talked about this on my channel the other day, they're only 9th in offensive SP Plus, which doesn't sound too terribly bad at all. And I'd be curious to look back on it. That feels like the first time I've seen a Lincoln Riley offense outside of the top 5 in SP Plus offense in a while.
It's going to get worse because S&P Plus wisely uses priors. That's why Michigan's still top 25 there. In reality, it's probably outside of the top 15 offensively. ESPN's efficiency metrics, they have USC. Oh my gosh, it's bad for Lincoln Riley. 24th in offensive efficiency. And that's, I mean, when Penn State's the best defense they played, and they've had games against Minnesota and Michigan and LSU where, I mean, and none of those defenses are bad by any means, but they're not. I don't know. My read on USC since the preseason's been very shaky. You may know more about USC than I do. That wouldn't shock me at all, like one bit, because my read on them has been, I mean, shockingly, I've been kind of right. In the preseason, I had them 2-4 in their first 6 games, and they're 3-3. And I had them losing to Minnesota in the preseason. I picked them losing to Minnesota the week of, and it happened because I don't think personnel-wise they were ready. Like Oregon, like you mentioned, Oregon's ready for the Big Ten. It's just a question of, are they going to harness what they have?
Yeah.
USC can scheme all they want, but Grinch and Riley ruined the roster so badly that I don't think it would matter all that much in year one. But what you said about the scheme, the amoeba defense, I really like that. And I need to think about that because I don't know. I mean,
yeah,
you want to dive into more of a detail about like what you mean about that? I'd be curious.
Well, it's just the basic theory of like, if you stay stagnant and stick to a very particular scheme and your set of plays, it can be really, really good. Like Jesse Minter's defense last season was just chef's kiss. Great. Like one of the all-time great defenses. That's borne out in all the metrics. And you saw all the players that got drafted to the NFL. But if you just stick to that same thing for so long, other teams are out here to beat you. Other teams are out here to compete with you. Eventually somebody's going to figure you out and have the kind of code to crack it, right? I don't know if you play the game, but I play a ton of Magic the Gathering. And it's a game where you build a deck of cards and you play kind of like Yu-Gi-Oh! Or something like that. And people are always figuring this out. You build a great deck that can win a tournament, and the next thing you know, somebody figures out exactly what you're doing, and they have the answer to that in their whatever they build to kind of give the answer to that, right? It's basic game theory, meta game kind of stuff, right? So my theory is that we saw this with like, it's the whole progression of the game to go back through the history, right? The wing T offense bore out the birth of the linebacker position, which was the answer to, you know, all of that inverted veer and stuff that players were running back in the day. And then if you want a more modern version of that, everyone got obsessed with the spread offense for a period of time. It was what everybody was running. Everyone was running up tempo. Everyone was trying to tire out other defenses and keep them from subbing and attack spaces instead of making blocks. Defenses caught up to that. And now we're actually kind of, one thing I've been covering on my channels, we're kind of getting back to a lot of physical football, by the way. In case you didn't notice it, 3 out of the 4 teams that made the college football playoff last season were teams that featured H-backs for like the first time in a long time. Alabama and Michigan were running H-backs. They were running more wing T style formations. And that's because when the metagame kind of shifts, you have to adapt, right? And I wonder, just from kind of like a really broad view, if with guys like Kotelnicki kind of figuring out how to attack this amoeba defense, that we're maybe seeing, and especially what's going on with Wink Martindale. But I do think, like you said, Wink Martindale runs a very basic version of what Jesse Minter and Mike McDonald were running. Those were the guys that kind of built off of his like base scheme, if you will. And I think the problem for Michigan is they've kind of reverted back to that basic stuff, and that's not working entirely well, especially when you're blitzing. Don't ever blitz Makari Page again. Just don't. He's not a blitzer. He spent like the last 3 seasons not even on the screen for a reason. He's back 15 yards. But anyway, I just think it's interesting. It's the kind of stuff I think about often, because I don't think, like we've talked about so far in this live stream. And again, I appreciate you coming on because I really like these in-depth conversations. Football comes down to basically like 3 things: your scheme and your base philosophy, the physicality you're able to play with, because no matter how well you scheme, you still got to block, you still got to tackle, and in-game coaching decisions. And scheme is a big part of it. It's like 30% of the formula that it's laid out there. So I do think it's really interesting. It would be really, really bad for USC fans if I'm right, because that shift to D'Anton Lynn may have come a little too late in the game. But yeah, USC giving up 391 yards to a quarterback that doesn't often throw that much. Pretty bad in this one. And by the way, we got to shout out Tyler Warren. 17 receptions for 224 yards and a touchdown in this one. I believe he broke some kind of record for receiving touchdowns by a tight end. I don't know if that was a Penn State record or a Big Ten record or what, but crazy game by Tyler Warren too.
Yeah. Really, really good performance. Definitely first team All-American at tight end.
Yeah.
And thank you for explaining that. That's very, it's very helpful. I think that what you said actually may more apply to the offensive side of the ball, because I think that, and part of it's the offensive line. USC's offensive line it's a mess. But Riley is not. I don't know if it's a Zachariah Branch issue or if it's a him as in Riley issue. They don't know how to utilize the talent they have. I mean, that could be a receiver core that, if properly schemed and coached, and I think it's well coached, but if properly schemed, I don't know who could stop that passing offense.
That receiver core should be like the third best in this conference behind Ohio State and Oregon, and maybe even right there with Oregon. I don't know how you feel about that, but
yeah, I mean, numerically, statistically, absolutely not. But in terms of talent, and it's impressive because all of them are basically sophomores with some juniors. They should be that good, but they're not. And whether it's Miller Moss, whether it's the offensive line not giving them protection, or Lincoln Riley, at USC, every year at USC, he has passed the ball more than ran the ball. The pass percentage is over 50% of all of the plays. That is completely uncharacteristic of any of his offenses at Oklahoma, where he ran the football more and ran it very well. They averaged like 8 yards per carry in 2018 with Kyler Murray, and I forget who the running back was then. But they haven't done that at USC. They've kind of deviated a little bit away from the run, went more pass heavy. Defensively, they were even worse than they were at Oklahoma. The offensive line outside of his first year there hasn't been the same. And if you're right about it defensively, I think that analogy may actually totally fit offensively, but it could defensively, because I have a lot to learn with scheme and then stuff. I never played the sport. If you're right there, well, the loss to Penn State may have been the funeral procession for Lincoln Riley, because it's not going to get easier.